500,000 soldiers. A quarter of the world's economy. 25% of global economic output. The largest treasury on earth. A territory stretching from Kabul to Bengal. By every measure, wealth, population, territory, military power, the Mughal Empire appeared almost unshakable. Yet none of it could save them. How did this empire end with its last emperor exiled to a prison cell in Rangoon, Burma, writing poetry about homesickness while British soldiers guarded his door? Two answers are usually given. Either Britain is blamed entirely, or the British are praised for restoring order to a collapsing system. Both narratives miss the same thing: the internal political failure that had been destabilizing the empire long before colonial rule fully emerged. At the peak of its disintegration, the Mughal Empire went through 3 emperors in a single year. This was not the disease itself. It was a symptom of a deeper problem that had haunted the empire since the day Babur founded it in 1526. The greatest enemy of the Mughal Empire was never outside its borders. It was a constitutional flaw that turned brothers into enemies and made every imperial succession a potential civil war. For 3 centuries, this problem was never solved. It returned, generation after generation, until there was nothing left to return to. To understand how, one must first understand how the empire was built to function. The Mughal Empire stretched across an enormous territory, from Kabul and Kashmir in the northwest to Bengal in the east and the Deccan in the south. To govern such vastness, emperors relied on governors who were often their own sons. Each prince commanded armies, collected revenue, and controlled territory. This was sensible administration, but it created a permanent danger. When an emperor died, or simply fell ill, every prince already possessed everything needed for war. An army, a treasury, noble support. The ingredients for civil war were always assembled and waiting. This danger was present from the very first day. When Babur died in 1530, just 4 years after founding the empire, he had not established a succession law. He simply declared Humayun his heir as a personal wish, and died. Every single Mughal succession after him was decided by violence. The surviving son became emperor by defeating and usually killing his brothers. These were not palace coups fought by small groups of guards. They were full-scale military conflicts involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers, lasting months or years, consuming treasury resources at the same rate as foreign wars. And with each succession war, something deeper was being destroyed. Emperor Akbar had designed the administrative backbone of the empire, the mansabdari system. Every noble held a rank called a mansab and received a land grant called a Jahangir in exchange for military service. The critical safeguard was rotation. Nobles were moved from one Jahangir to another every few years so that no one could build permanent local power. The land always belonged to the emperor. The noble was always temporary. Succession wars broke this safeguard completely. When princes went to war for the throne, each one needed noble support desperately. Nobles controlled armies, revenue and key territories. No prince could win without them. So princes bargained, offering permanent control of Jagirs, increased revenue rights, reduced military obligations, and freedom from central supervision. Nobles accepted, chose their side, and when their prince won, they collected. Over successive generations, this transformed Mughal nobility entirely. Officials who had been temporary administrators serving at the emperor's pleasure became hereditary rulers of their own territories, acknowledging the emperor's authority in name only. The Jahangir meant to be temporary became permanent. Military obligations were quietly abandoned. Revenue meant to flow to Delhi was retained locally. What Akbar had designed as a system of central control had become, generation by generation, a system of distributed power that the center could no longer reclaim. By the early 18th century, the governors of Bengal, Hyderabad and Awadh, the 3 richest provinces of the empire, were effectively independent rulers. They kept the real revenue, commanded their own armies, and made their own decisions. The Mughal Empire had become a collection of independent states held together by nothing more than a shared name. The Sayyid brothers show how completely this transformation had occurred. These 2 administrators, not princes, not royalty, were making and unmaking emperors by 1713. They installed Farrukhsiyar on the throne. When he showed signs of independence, they had him blinded and murdered. They then placed 4 more emperors in quick succession. No Mughal emperor had the power, the revenue, or the army to resist them. The throne had become the possession of whoever commanded the most loyal army of nobles, not of the dynasty that had built it. Akbar designed a system where the emperor held power and nobles served. Successive succession wars reversed this completely. By 1720, nobles held power, and emperors served, or were replaced. With the center hollowed out, the edges of the empire began to collapse inward. The Marathas were the first to move into the space. When Aurangzeb was fighting his brothers in 1657 and 1659, the Deccan Plateau was lightly governed, the emperor's attention was fixed on Delhi and the throne. Shivaji used exactly this period to consolidate Maratha power in the western Deccan. By the time Aurangzeb turned south and tried to crush them, they were already too strong. His campaign became a 27-year war that consumed between 70% and 80% of imperial revenue, compared to Akbar, who had spent 30% to 40% on military while simultaneously investing in trade, agriculture and administration. The Deccan War did not just drain the treasury. It removed the emperor from Delhi for nearly 3 decades, leaving the northern provinces to govern themselves, which, given what the nobles had already become, meant govern themselves permanently. Then came Nadir Shah. In 1739, the Persian conqueror did not invade a strong, united empire. He invaded a weak, fragmented, decentralized one that had already been consumed by generations of succession wars. In 57 days he killed over 30,000 people, burned districts of the capital, and removed what historians estimate as $50 to $100 billion in modern equivalent, including the Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor Diamond. 3 centuries of accumulated Mughal wealth, gone in under 2 months. The empire that remained was an empire in name only. Into this vacancy stepped the British. At the Battle of Plassey in 1757, a 3,000-man British force defeated a much larger Nawabi army, not through military superiority, but because Mir Jafar, the Nawab's own commander-in-chief, had already agreed to betray his master. This was not conquest. It was the final expression of a system so fragmented and corrupted by succession politics that its own military commanders could be purchased by foreign merchants. The British then followed the same pattern across the subcontinent, finding the succession dispute, the factional rivalry, the resentful noble, the ambitious prince, and funding one side in exchange for territorial and revenue concessions. They used India's own political fractures as the instrument of its subjugation. This is not a defense of colonialism. 200 years of British extraction caused damage that echoes to the present day. But that extraction was possible because the empire that had generated a quarter of world GDP had already destroyed itself from within, leaving a civilization rich in resources and talent, but politically unable to resist organized external pressure. The British did not start the fire. They simply walked into a burning house, and took everything that had not yet turned to